Okay, I just got the hi sign from the tech crew. Thank you for putting us on the internet. We're live. Good evening. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. Thanks to those in our audience and to the people joining us online for being here tonight as we explore the intersection of faith and climate. I'm Barbara Soderlin, Director of Advancement for the Nebraska Journalism Trust. We created the nonprofit trust in 2021 to combat misinformation and divisiveness in our communities. Thanks to donor and grant support, and I know there's many supporters in the room tonight, so thank you. We provide news coverage and events that inform Nebraskans and connect them across cultures and geographies. This is one of those events. Tonight, we are going to explore climate change in Nebraska, which we've all experienced. We've seen new record temperatures. It was 80 degrees in February, drought and flooding that affects homeowners and farmers, and increasing instances of extreme weather. Specifically tonight, we'll look at the role of faith in how we respond to climate change and in how we create solutions. Tonight's program is funded through our partnership with Humanities Nebraska and its initiative called Weathering Uncertainty. Humanities Nebraska has also provided funding for news coverage related to our state's response to climate change. You'll see that coverage coming up on our news site, flatwaterfreepress.org, where you can sign up for a free subscription to our weekly newsletter. So thank you very much to Humanities Nebraska for your partnership and support. We're thrilled to be here with you tonight at the Tri-Faith Center in Omaha. This is the hub of the Tri-Faith Initiative, which provides a welcoming place in West Omaha for diverse people of all faiths to gather, meet, learn, and interact. Our moderator tonight is Wendy Goldberg, Executive Director of Tri-Faith Initiative. She is an advocate for interfaith cooperation and social change. She champions inclusivity, bridging differences, and transforming lives through the unity of diverse groups. Wendy will lead a conversation with three individuals with unique perspectives. Tamir is a chemical engineer. Tamir, can you raise your hand so we know? There you are. Currently working in the field of renewable energy, specifically solar and thermoelectric energy generation. Maybe he can explain what thermoelectric energy generation is. I'm not totally sure. He has previously worked in the semiconductor industry with a focus on silicon manufacturing processes and environmental mitigation. Tamir is a Muslim, a native of Rhode Island, and now a resident of Omaha. He has served as a garden volunteer here at Tri-Faith. He showed me his garden shed that's out. You have to look through that back window to see it, but he got solar panels and Wi-Fi and a coffee maker, so it doesn't sound like the shed in my backyard, but he enjoys cycling, traveling, and barbecuing. We should have made this a dinner party. Cliff Fleener. Cliff, you raise your hand? Yep, there you are. Is Vice President of Sustainability and Environmental Affairs for the Omaha Public Power District. He joined OPPD last spring with more than 25 years of global experience in data-driven solutions for environmental risk management. Cliff was formerly Valmont Industries Global Director of Environmental Responsibility, where he oversaw compliance and sustainability strategies across more than 85 facilities in 25 countries. He's a United States Army veteran and past president of the Nebraska Recycling Council. And then Ken Winston, there in the middle, is Executive Director of Nebraska Interfaith Power and Light, an organization that brings the resources of faith and spirituality to the table in response to the moral challenges presented by the climate crisis. Ken is also a community organizer for the Nebraska Sierra Club. He led their opposition to the Keystone XL pipeline. He loves to play guitar, sing in the church choir, and go for walks. We look forward to hearing from them. Already, please silence your phones, but you do not have to put them away. You may submit questions throughout the evening by zapping that QR code that you see on your screen. And there's a form that should pop up. We'll see. If you have any trouble, let us know. Okay, somebody confirms that it's working. So you can scan that. And if you prefer an older-fashioned way of submitting your questions, I think if you head to the back and find one of our team, you're welcome to visit with us and just whisper a question into our ear, and we'll note that. Our event is being live streamed and will be available to later to rewatch on YouTube. I believe that before we start, we have a video to play that Wendy has asked us to play about the Tri-Faith Initiative, and someone is going to play that for us. Sierra, is that person you? Here she comes.
Okay, so this is interesting technology.
Okay.
So we have it to play on the live stream, but we don't have it to play in person.
Oh, no. Okay, well.
Can you project the screen from there?
Yeah. So how long is the video?
4 minutes.
I think the work that Tri-Faith is doing is important. I think it's more important now, and I see that so clearly than I ever have before.
Interfaith, relationships are hard. They take a lot of work, but they're so rewarding.
The value is not just look at what we're doing, but it's also let me help you understand how you can do this too.
The Tri-Faith Initiative grew out of 9/11 in the darkness of the pain of our country and the geopolitical situation. Some members of the synagogue gathered at a local mosque to say that no harm should come to members of the Muslim tradition in Omaha, Nebraska, because they look like or use the same vocabulary as people who had done harm in our country.
Something like the Tri-Faith will be really telling people what is true Islam, a religion of peace, welcoming the neighbors, feel for each other. It's an absolutely good cause.
We have had different Christian partners. For 9 years, we had the Episcopal Diocese as a partner, and the religious landscape shifted for that community in such a way that they invited Countryside Community Church to be a partner in their place.
When it was first brought to us, it was like, why would we do this? And the more we went through it, and the more I got to know people from AMI and people from the synagogue, it was kind of like, wow, this is really cool, this is an opportunity.
When you think about the example it sets, even globally, of we can do this hard work, right? We can have these difficult conversations and we can come together in humanity despite our differences and actually in joy of our differences, right? And the connections between people.
Everybody's welcome everywhere, and I think that the interactions are just really authentic and really genuine, and it's where I want to raise my kids, It
is the only place where a Muslim, a Reformed Jew, and a member of the United Christian Church know enough about each other's, faith that they really don't have to ask them. Why do you pray? Why do you fast? Why do you do what you do? And that's, hard to find elsewhere.
Our walk that we host in September, when I saw the first year members of 35 faith organizations all up on stage, that to me was telling that we were on the right path if we could bring that many communities together on one stage.
It's an example of how to get out of your shell while also still being able to be home.
Definitely, kind of a beacon of hope. Everyone can come together and have a civil conversation.
There are lots of human interaction that occurs between different people, naturally. I mean, they just, when you are a friend, as a Muslim, when you are a friend with a Jewish person in developing something good for the community, you become friends, right? It's really hard not to develop an empathy in that case.
I can go visit the mosque, I can visit the church, I have friends at all the congregations, and I feel like any of the 4 buildings are home to me.
I want this to be the success story that people look back on and say it started in Omaha.
We've got an Abraham bridge that connects and unites all of us, and we need to walk that bridge. We need to walk it.
It's not enough for Trifaith to create a safe space for people to gather. The people who come here to be part of this movement have to be brave, and we have to hold each other accountable. And that's how we're going to witness social change and a place where everyone belongs.
My kids, you know.
Is the only place where a Muslim, a Reformed Jew, and a member of the United Christian Church know enough about each other's, faith that they really don't have to ask them, why do you pray? Why do you fast? Why do you do what you do? And that's, hard to find elsewhere.
Our walk that we host in September, when I saw the first year members of 35 faith organizations all up on stage, that to me was telling that we were on the right path if we could bring that many communities together on one stage.
It's an example of how to get out of your shell while also still being able to be home.
Definitely, kind of a beacon of hope. Everyone can come together and have a civil conversation.
There are lots of human interaction that occurs between different people, naturally. They just, when you are a friend, as a Muslim, when you are a friend with a Jewish person in developing something good for the community, you become friends, right? It's really hard not to develop an empathy in that case.
I can go visit the mosque, I can visit the church, I have friends at all the congregations, and I feel like any of the 4 buildings are home to me.
I want this to be the success story that people look back on and say it started in Omaha.
We've got an Abraham bridge that connects and unites all of us, and we need to walk that bridge. We need to walk it.
It's not enough for Trifaith to create a safe space for people to gather. The people who come here to be part of this movement have to be brave, and we have to hold each other accountable. And that's how we're going to witness social change and a place where everyone belongs.
It was worth it, Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy, for inviting us here to your home and this community, and to be here with you tonight. Looking forward to the conversation.
Let me put this one down here, and we'll share and you share. Is that good neighbors?
So welcome. On behalf of the Trifaith Initiative, thank you to our partners. We're so grateful for the work that you do. The conversation about misinformation and disinformation really matters in our world today when we're talking about faith and when we're talking about climate and when we're talking about seeing the other. And I'm sure I hope that you thought as you were coming here today, wow, I wonder how those folks at the Trifaith Initiative are doing, because I bet it's a pretty hard time. And I'd like to validate that. It's a pretty hard time. I am a member of Temple Israel. I'm Jewish. I've been on this journey to create this co-location for nearly 20 years. It's been my life's work. And I can tell you that it gets harder every day. And some of that is the geopolitical situation. And yet I have hope. And this model of bringing people together to have complex conversations about difficult topics is what we need more of. Unfortunately, I think we have many people who are getting their information in sound bites and characters. And it really takes in-depth conversations like we intend to have tonight to understand complex issues. So thank you for joining us and for offering to bring your knowledge. This is an unscripted start to the question, which is a little bit my style. But Tamir, it was mentioned only for you that you are Muslim, right? And we need to remember that we haven't maybe had permission to talk about our religious identity in public. And we've been kind of socialized to think that that's not normative. But before we dig into the conversations of climate, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as a Muslim? What that journey has looked like for you, and maybe why you said yes to come tonight.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I've been looking forward to this. My parents moved to the United States back in 1967 from Egypt. And then me and my brother, we were born in Rhode Island. And then we were raised there. So, I have very fond memories of my childhood. And I was raised, going to Sunday school at a mosque. And that's where, I learned about my faith, being a Muslim. And then obviously my parents at home would, create as much as they could this, acknowledge, they basically let us know, me, my brother and I, that we're going to be different and that's okay. And that was one of the things about what drew my parents to the United States was this, it's okay to be different in America as long as, you can be an American and still be Muslim. And have different faiths and different ideas, but we all have this common bond, which is in our Constitution and in the foundations of what this country was built on. So, I grew up with that spirit, and again, I learned a lot of what we're going to talk about today when it comes to faith and its relationship with climate change. In my mind, comes from a lot of what I learned at Sunday school, and then just going to the mosques on Fridays and listen to the sermons, and so that's really what's informed me and about this topic when it comes to the faith part, and then of course we'll get into the whole chemical engineering side too.
I'm not sure if you know, but Ramadan started yesterday. So from all of us, Ramadan Mubarak.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Kenneth, can you tell us a little bit about your faith journey and how come you said yes tonight?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and thank you to everybody for being here. And I want to learn more about your story. Amir, is that your? Tamir. Okay. So, want to learn more about everybody's story. But I've got kind of I grew up in a Christian household and was kind of conservative. And then as a young man, was kind of a spiritual searcher. I was looking for various different things and lived in a yoga ashram for a while, and eventually kind of settled back with the Christian church because that felt more like what it felt more like home to me. It felt but it couldn't just be any church. It had to be one that was open and accepting, and it couldn't be one that was saying you got to believe this or else you're going to hell. That didn't work for me. So that was kind of my personal experience. I guess I also wanted to just talk a little bit about something that I was going to talk about a little bit more later, but just I think there's some important messages and I think in all of our faith traditions there's a lot that we share. I'm not clear on how much of our faith traditions that we share, but there's lots of great messages in the Old Testament of what Christians call the Old Testament of the Bible. The messages about the earth is the Lord's and all that's within it. And so I grew up with messages about taking care of the earth, and those were foundational messages. But I also grew up with a belief in miracles in a way, and I think that's important for our work. Not that we go out and we go, okay, I need a miracle, I'm just going to pray for it and it'll happen, but rather the idea that we can, if we use our spirit and our mind and our heart, that we can create miracles. And the specific example I always want to use is I grew up in a family that didn't have many financial resources. And so I literally would come home and there would be nothing in the cupboard, nothing in the refrigerator. And somehow food got put on the table. So there's the parable of the loaves and the fishes in the New Testament of the Bible. And I often say that I got to witness it created on a regular basis by my mother. So, and then I've later experienced other miracles, but I guess I'll save that for later.
Very good. Well, first I just want to thank the Nebraska Journalism Trust and the Tri-Faith community for having me here. Of course, I work for OPPD, which, as you all probably know, is a publicly owned power utility representing 13 counties in eastern Nebraska, 5,000 square miles, non-sectarian, obviously. So my comments on religion are strictly my own, so I'll start by saying that. But I will say that the organization I work for very much reflects my values and my interest in engaging with the community. And I think that's one of the best things, having worked in the private sector and for-profit companies for 25 odd years. It's really wonderful to work for an entity that has the discipline of the private sector with the outreach and the connection to the community that OPPD has. Tamir, welcome. 1967, my family's been in this country since 1754. So it's, welcome aboard. Some of the people from the Netherlands always tell us, even farther back than that. But we've been in the country since 1754, had a strong military tradition in that company. My son is serving in the Army. I served in the Army. My brother was in the Marines. Dad was in the Navy. It goes back all the way to the Revolutionary War. And so you can see we had a Christian religion. I'm a deeply imperfect United Methodist. I don't know if there's United Methodists here, but as you can tell, I'm not an expert on Scripture. But the values that were important to me were the values of hard work, personal responsibility, and working with your community to make things better, and to take action where appropriate to help better the lives of everyone in the community as much as possible. And I'm delighted to be here for this presentation.
Thank you. Kenneth, I have a first question for you. Studies have shown that papal leadership on climate change have contributed to an uptick in positive climate opinions. Following Pope Francis's visit, the frequency of discussions regarding climate change in the Catholic community increased. What responsibility or roles do you think that faith leaders have in addressing climate change? And I just want to make sure that when we speak about faith leaders, that we understand that there are clearly ordained people, and I mean leaders in terms of lay and professional leadership. So let's open the container a little bit to not give the clergy all the say or responsibility of changing climate.
Good, because well, thank you, Wendy. I've been involved with Nebraska Interfaith Power and Light since 2013, which I guess is 11 years now. My math is correct. But I was an environmental advocate before that, and worked for the Sierra Club. But as I said, I also grew up in a household where taking care of the earth was an important value. So that was a message that particularly my mother instilled in me. And so, but one of the challenges that we face, you were talking about Laudato Si, the papal encyclical, and I probably ought to give a couple of disclaimers here. First of all, I'm not ordained in any way, shape, or form. As I often say, my theology comes from the back row of the choir loft. I'm a bass, in case you couldn't tell. I don't have the theological background. I'm also not Catholic, but it's one of these things where it seems that like there's kind of fits and starts, and there's moments where there's lots of momentum, and then it feels like it kind of falls away. One of the challenges that happens in churches, particularly from the pulpit, is that often pastors feel like they shouldn't say anything about things like climate change because it's viewed as being political. And that really, well, for example, the Laudato Si was issued in 2015, and then in 2016 there was an election. And suddenly a lot of things that weren't political before became a lot more political. And now there are a lot of people who don't want to mention the words climate change, particularly in rural communities. And so a lot of times the work of the leadership that you're describing has to come from within the congregation. Now, it helps if the pastor or the pastoral leadership of that faith community is willing to step up and say, okay, this is something we ought to address. But oftentimes it happens because of the fact that someone says, okay, let's create a green team. Let's start recycling. Let's start composting. Let's make sure that we have, well, the grounds here are just wonderful. Imagine, I mean, I'm sure that was an intentional choice to create the kinds of grounds that you have here with native plants and things of that nature. So ideas like that, how can we be in more harmony with nature? But one of the important things about faith messages or faith communities working on this issue is that sometimes it can cut through those political boundaries, and it can connect with something that's basic within people about their values, their moral judgments, and that's the idea, is to bring people together and find common ground on matters that really matter to all of us, and climate change is certainly one of those.
As long as you have the mic, let's just ask one follow-up question to that. Related to your work at Power and Light, can you tell us some of the services that you provide to help congregations do what you just explained?
Sure. Well, there's lots of things. I mean, if you're interested, I can provide you with I'd be glad to connect you with our newsletter. Just give me your name and email address, and we're glad to send a newsletter out to folks that talks about things that are going on. But there's programs like Cool Congregations, where they help provide guidance for congregations that want to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, their carbon footprint. And there's different ways of doing that. Some of it could be like putting solar panels on the building, or it could be something like just changing the grounds. There's a category called Sacred Grounds. Actually, there's 2 Lincoln congregations that have won awards in the Sacred Grounds category in the National Cool Congregations Challenge. One is Aldersgate Methodist. If you're ever at 84th and South in Lincoln, stop by and look at the garden they've got there. It's just lovely. It's really, really a lovely garden. Actually, I think if the Tri-Faith campus were to submit an application, I think you could win an award for Sacred Grounds, because these are very lovely.
Write that down.
And you can win an award of up to $1,000 for doing that. So that's one of the things. There's also Faith Climate Action Week, where we encourage congregations to do special things during the week of Earth Day, special services, there are prayers and things like that. And there's other resources that we have available. I have a little handout I could give people. I didn't make many copies of it, but it's something like, it says 25 things you can do under $25 to reduce your carbon emission footprint. But one of the other things we do is we also do advocacy. And we have to be careful because we're a 501c3, so we don't do a lot of direct lobbying, but we do try to do outreach and advocacy about policies that matter. And that's important because while it's important for an individual to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions footprint, as Cliff knows, an organization like OPPD can make a much bigger impact by retiring a coal plant, or by investing in wind or solar energy. So by changing the amount of emissions that they provide, so that they produce. So there's lots of different ways, and I could describe some other things. Also, Well, as I said, I'm not an ordained pastor or anything like that, but we do have some ordained pastors on our board. So if you wanted somebody to come and give a sermon about climate change, we could do that. Or if you just want somebody to come and talk about climate change, well, faith and climate issues, I'm glad to do that, or other board members are glad to do that as well. So thanks for the opportunity to explain that.
Cliff, you're next. All right. So here's your question. How do the policies of your role at work and its governing bodies line up with the policies of your faith in your faith community? And where do they marry and where do they conflict?
That's a great question. Let me just start by saying that at OPPD, the core values are a passion to serve, honoring the community, and caring about each other. And that very much aligns with my faith journey and how I grew up in the Methodist Church. And I think that's really lived by the 2,000 odd employees that we have working for the organization. I think if we're talking about where they conflict, I think you have to look more broadly at my career. I think I've been working in environmental regulation for more than 25 years. I think one area, and I don't do much Superfund work, probably familiar with what Superfund was, clean up contaminated lands. That was most of what I did for 20 odd years. One of the areas where I often had conflict, maybe with the system in general, was that there's a tendency to get into a feedback loop, constant process that maybe didn't actually lead to a result. In the modern American sense, there's a lot of regulations out there that can slow a lot of things down. There's a reason for them, and they're important and they matter. And some regulatory frameworks are more flexible than others, but in Superfund, it seemed like it was very, very hard to bring sites to closure. Where you work in other countries, like Australia or Europe, same kind of contamination, same sorts of areas, it was easier to actually get those sites put back into productive use. So that's one example where it may conflict. It's often a frustration with speed that I know is shared with many other individuals. The system gets quite complex. That's what I mean.
I'm going to ask you the same question. Tell us a little bit about, and I know we're going to speak less about your specific job and more about renewable energy in general. So tell us a little bit about that and how your faith and faith community lines up with the need or understanding of renewable energy.
Yeah, I think I've been fortunate in my career to have been now, as Wendy mentioned, I work in renewable energy, specifically solar and thermoelectric, which is a conversion of waste heat into energy. So it's an exciting field because what we do is try to make the existing technology even better. There's as great as solar is as an option, or thermoelectric, it can get better with the materials that we use, being the sources. Instead of having a chemical that's difficult to mine and causes issues, there's organic sources that are being explored, and there's a lot of work in that arena. So it's exciting, and I feel fortunate to be working in that field because it aligns with my beliefs with regard to climate change, and what my faith also supports when it comes to just treading lightly on the earth, and again leaving this earth better than the way that I found it, which is always in the back of my mind. So I feel fortunate, even in my roles in the past. When I worked in the semiconductor industry, I know that one of my projects that I spent a lot of time on is, environmental mitigation from the chemical reactors that are used to produce the silicon that goes into the chips that we use every day. So that was something, me and the team that I was working on, we spent a lot of time designing scrubbers. And I think, when we talk about, that's where the harmony was, and I feel fortunate to be, to work in those roles, and I got a lot of support with resources and time from the companies that I worked for. But when I think about conflicts, it is frustrating how long it just does take and how much work is involved in actually achieving, the goals that we set for trying to mitigate. We all want these, semiconductor chips, and we want the products that go into them. But then the back end of it is what do we do with these chips that are in our cell phones, in our refrigerators, in our cars? What do we do with them when they're, when they need to be disposed of? So there's a lot of work that gets done, and on that end, and a lot of work that still needs to be done. And yeah, my hope is that the pace, continues to speed up, and so, but yeah, that's how I'd answer that.
So you've spoken to your professional expertise related to renewables and such. Can you tell a little bit about your personal journey in assisting us on the Tri-Faith Commons? And I think it's just a beautiful example of how one person can, impact a project, and hopefully it'll be inspiring to others to do similar projects.
Yeah, it was just such a great, I love telling people about this because my wife and I just moved here to Omaha. We used to live in Colorado, and we had heard about Tri-Faith, and I think it was, during the pandemic that we heard about it. And then, but we had an event right here, actually, and we came in, and there was a few people here that were actually at that gathering, and that's when I got to get to know Wendy, and I told her about what what I do and my field, and then she found out about a need out in the garden here, the community garden, where it's a collaborative effort between all three congregations, and we get together, and she found that they needed a solar panel out there for electricity, because there's no electricity out there at the garden, and the shed would get really hot, the tool shed. And they wanted to put a fan in there just to provide some cooling. So it was a perfect fit for me. So I got out there and I got to know a lot of people. I made so many friends, and it was just, the word is just welcoming. It was a great way, especially coming out of the pandemic when we were so isolated. It was just so refreshing, and I have those just relationships now from people from all three congregations that are so special to me. And it was all through this whole project of getting the solar panel installed, and now it's sitting on the roof of the shed out there, the solar panel, and it's working great. So, but yeah, it was a great project.
It was incredible, right? Because they first came to me and said, could you pay to run a line to get electricity from the building to the shed, right? And that was a clear no for me, right? We were trying to figure out even how to come back from the pandemic. And then all of a sudden this miracle happened. There's a fan, but there's many other things, that the battery chargers, all kinds of things.
We charge the battery little weed whacker, and we make coffee and tea out there. So
how big is the panel?
The panel, so it started off as just 100 watts, but then we got another panel, and I think there was another person that got involved and moved it to the roof. So now I think we've got either 150 or 200 watts up there.
And how much did it cost?
It really wasn't that much. I would say the panel probably cost $100. So
just sometimes I made a story about that was going to be a really much bigger lift, right? And you just have to know the right people, right? So it's so true over and over again, right? Let's see. I'm wondering. I know that we're disappointed that Martha is not able to be with us tonight, but you said you were a little familiar with some of the report that she is releasing, and maybe you could just give us a little bit of perspective so that at least the curiosity is piqued and everybody gets a little preview.
Okay, well, first of all, that's really cool. I mean, I want to hear more about. Actually, I want to hear if you have any ideas about helping churches get solar on them. We need to talk. Anyway, that's the great thing about these things. We get to come and meet people that we'd never met before and learned things. You know, it's a good day when I learn something new. Hopefully it happens every day. So, okay. Well, first of all, obviously I can't speak for Martha, and Martha is a wealth of knowledge. If you've ever heard her speak, she really knows her stuff. She was a real gem when she was the state climatologist and went across the state and told people about climate change and its impacts. And I know that she got pushback in some communities, and she still dealt with all of that. So I want to pay homage to her, because really an awesome person, and she did a great job while she was in that position. Well, here's, and I don't know directly what the motivation was about putting in the faith element of the climate report, but I know that in 2015 there was well, in 2014, let me back up. The University of Nebraska put together an assessment of climate change in Nebraska. And then in 2015, the following year, they put together a series of sector roundtables where they met with people and talked to them about and heard input about what how climate change impacted them, and there was a faith component of that particular effort in 2015. So there was that element of that part of that report. So I think that's part of the reason that they wanted to include it in the 2020 in the 2024 update. Now what they're doing is they're updating the 2014 report, but they also have a person, I believe it's Dan DeLeo, who's with Creighton University, who's going to be making comments about faith and climate change and providing that input into the report. And the report is due, I believe, December 31st of this year. And I've had a conversation with Deborah Bathke, who's the interim climatologist, and it sounds like they're on track to get the report done in time. So that's what I know about it. But yeah, I really wish that Martha were here and she could talk more directly about it.
Cliff, I'm going to ask you another question. So Javier Fernandez and I are friends. I have deep respect for him. He's your boss. I also have been a moderator for a conversation in Omaha about the helping people to understand the kind of tricky situation that you're in related to the closing of the coal facilities, the increase. I've heard Javier present to the chamber board on the reality that we all have increased our usage in such a way. Climate change has increased air conditioning and such. So I'm wondering, can you tell us from an organizational perspective how those values that you mentioned at OPPD have played out in balancing, navigating, maintaining power, literally through the electricity, but also the power that you all hold in your relationships to the region and the grid and all of those considerations, because I think there's an intersection with this conversation for us to understand the complexities that you're navigating.
Well, thank you, Wendy. Yes, it's an extraordinarily complex ecosystem that we're in, and I think as we're moving through and building our sustainability program, which I'm blessed Javier hired me with the first sustainability program in the organization, is to look at the importance of balancing the needs of the future with the present. We, across the country, we have a crisis in inadequate generation. Generation is increasing. We need new power. Climate change is happening. That's not a surprise to anyone in this room. We just had another 50-year winter storm, two of them in the last 3 years. And you know, it's critically important for the people that are here today, right now, that we keep the lights on. It's crucially important, balanced with the need over a time period to decarbonize. And that's the challenge we have while working in a very complex regulatory environment that we have to meet. I think the positive part is we're able to do a lot already at this point in bringing new generation online, including some new generation that 90% of which will be, the energy will be clean energy from renewable sources and working on adding new solar all the time. But as you know, anyone here that's worked in local government, county government, federal government, you can't just put up a solar field. There's a whole process you have to be involved with, and it takes time to convince people, because we want to do things with the community, not to the community. So it takes time, it takes effort, it takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of communication to deal with that. But what the challenges that we're facing are not unique to OPPD, but they're really going across the country in terms of the need of new generation. And you're going to see more of that play out. I will see, in my experience, working globally, the good news is that in my last 10 years of monitoring plants across the U.S., our carbon footprint, at least as far as scope 2 emissions from electricity, has been going down consistently for the last 20 years, which is good. Is it fast enough? Of course not. But we're moving in the right direction, and I think at some point we're certainly gonna get there.
I'm sorry, I wanted to add something to
Please.
what he just said. Actually, I'd love to have a full conversation with you about your work, but in terms of, there's also pushback at the state level in Nebraska on renewable energy. And right now we're dealing with a couple of pieces of legislation that are specifically intended to make it harder to site and develop renewable energy. One of them is LB 399, which is on the floor of the legislature. It would make it more difficult to get renewable energy sited. And then there's LB 1370, which is also would make it more difficult to develop renewable energy. So it is happening in some rural areas, but it's also happening at the legislature, and we definitely don't need that. We don't need more obstacles to renewable energy development. So a little pitch to call your state senator and tell him or her that they should vote against those two bills.
So when we're talking about the impact in rural America, interestingly, we are hosting a conference in May with the USDA. There is a national strategy to counter anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And the reality is that those issues are different in rural America than they are in larger metropolitan areas where people have an opportunity to rub shoulders with the religious other on the subway or whatever, in schools and such. And in rural spaces, the culture is different in terms of change. And so, you've each mentioned it a little bit, but perhaps you could tell us a little bit more. I've had some conversations with Javier about meetings with communities that agriculture is their lifeline, right? And so what does that look like to come into communities? Is there any opportunity to work with faith communities in terms of doing education, or what works, or where are the challenges and the pain points?
Well, first of all, we have a really excellent public affairs team that does a lot of work over a long period of time in rural areas where we have to go in. And you're right, it's a different subset and a different approach. We have to work with all levels of the local government. And while I can't say we've necessarily worked with any specific congregations outside of perhaps using facilities from time to time,
Might be an opportunity.
it may be an opportunity certainly for us to look at as we engage. But you have to, I think the important part is trying to understand and listen to concerns. Their views are very different in rural communities, but I think I spent most of my time working with people that are hostile, not OPPD, but in previous places that are not necessarily inclined to go along with climate change or even believe climate change is real. And it just takes time to convince them and translate some of the impacts of climate change and translate the benefits of what we're trying to do, how it affects them in a positive light. But I'll definitely pass on. I mean, I think working with faith communities could have a positive impact in rural communities.
Yes, well, definitely think that it's important to communicate in every way possible. And I agree with you that oftentimes in rural areas it's difficult to talk about those things. But I've found that when we go to rural communities, sometimes we don't use the words climate change. We talk about things like care of God's creation. We talk about things like saving money. I mean, well, I mean, okay, well, if you do a garden like this, you won't have to put so much water on it. You won't have to put as much fertilizer on it. If you change out your light bulbs, then you won't have to spend as much money on electric bills. If you insulate your walls better, or maybe if you get solar panels. So sometimes it really depends upon who the audience is, but sometimes well, the messenger counts and the message counts. And sometimes there are certain words that you say that are just politically charged for one reason or other, and if you try to talk in that language, they tune you out. And so that's a real challenge. But it is interesting, though, that people in rural areas push back against the notions of climate change while they're in the midst of experiencing it on a day-to-day basis, and it impacts their bottom line. I mean, it's one of those things that I find, well, the contradiction I find hard to deal with. It's like, how can you look at this and not say that's climate change and not acknowledge that reality? So yeah, it can be challenging. But yeah, we would love to, if there's an opportunity to partner with OPPD on a project like that, we'd love to work with you. Did you want to say something?
So, you know, I think that's an interesting thing. I always go to panels and I think, like, it'd be interesting to ask for questions from the audience, and I hope that you're starting to think about what your questions are. But I am always wishing that the panelists would ask each other questions. And so I'm curious, you know, Kenneth, how about you? Do you have a question for one of the other panelists? You've shown a lot of interest in their work. What, you know, if you had something you'd like to know more about Tamir's work or Cliff's work, where would you start? I threw you off.
Gosh, I've got too many questions. Well, Tamir, I'd like to learn more about what you do with solar energy, and do you work with, well, I'd like to know more of what you do and your role, and how do we, are there ways that we can help you get more people to invest in solar energy?
I've thought about, the opportunities. Like, all of these buildings here have roofs, and so I've really thought about how neat it would be to have solar panels on the mosque and on the temple and on the church and then here, and how much, because we do get a lot of sun in Nebraska. Nebraska is one of the sunniest states, actually, even in the winter. So the opportunities there. We got to crunch the numbers. Payback period's important. But it is exciting to think about the opportunities in that way. Now, as technology advances and as new processes emerge to make these solar panels, they'll become cheaper, and so as that cost comes down, it's going to make it easier. It's going to shorten that payback period and make it more of an incentive, I think, for solar panels to be on all these roofs. But yeah, that's just an interesting, when we talk about faith-based, you think about all the churches and the synagogues and temples and, all the religious different congregations around the country. And yeah, it's an opportunity. It's exciting. And like I say, as the technology evolves, I think we're going to be seeing more of that, hopefully.
So I'm going to dig into that question a little bit more, because we've played some mental gymnastics about that for this building, because he said that to me and I was like, okay, like, you can save me some money, I'm in. You ran the numbers.
I crunched the numbers, yeah.
So tell us, like, what's involved in that, and what do you mean by payback period? And unfortunately for us, we felt the payback period wasn't quite the juice worth the squeeze in this moment, right? But what are some factors that contribute to the advancement, and where do you think the industry's going in terms of, should we be looking at it in the next 1 year or 3 years or 5 years? What's the forecast?
Well, the efficiency of solar panels continues to improve. So the technology is really ramping up at a fast pace. So that's what's exciting about it. So as that efficiency goes up, you'll be able to generate more electricity with the same number of panels. When you look at the factors that are involved, and Cliff can obviously talk to this, the cost of electricity. If we were buying it from OPPD, how much less, what is that savings that we would have? When you're talking about payback period, how much can a solar, how much can the solar panels replace that, that amount of electricity that you otherwise would have had to buy from OPPD? So it's a question of the cost of electricity, goes into that calculation, and then obviously the efficiency of the solar panels and the cost of the solar panels. So those are the three main factors when we're trying to calculate how long will it take to pay for that initial investment. So ideally, we'd love to see something, less than 10 years, 7 years. Those are all really, they sound great, but when you start talking about 15 years, 18 years, well, then the life of the solar panel could be only 20 or 25 years. So if you're just going to break even at year 17, it's not as, it's not as much of an incentive, I think. So those are some of the issues that are involved with number crunching.
Yeah, well, that sounds exciting. Well, a couple of other things that I wanted to mention. Previously, before last year, churches and other nonprofits couldn't make use of the federal tax credits for solar panels, and now they can. And it's up to, 30% in most situations. If it's in a low-income community, you can add on another 10%. And there's potentially some additional benefits that you can also receive. So it's called direct pay, where there's a process you have to go through, but there are more. It's much easier for faith communities to do solar than they could previous to now. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and I guess I'm thinking back to the video and the inspiring message about this community, is that faith communities are beacons for the community, for the rest of the community, and they provide messages about the way that life should be lived and in harmony with each other and with nature. And things like solar panels and making an energy efficient building and having beautiful grounds that are in harmony with nature, those all are kind of messages about beacons to the community, about the way that it can be an inspiration to the community about things that they can do themselves, and about, it's also a way of saying climate change is real and we need to address it, and we're doing our part. So wanted to throw that in. Maybe Cliff's got a comment too.
Sure, I just want to have a great comment on Ken's discussion about translating climate into economic sense. It's really a critical, important component, because to reach people that maybe have a natural affinity for climate change, to try to swing them over. And we're kind of in a unique position. I mean, there's a lot of grant money floating around from the IRA and other things that are being promoted by Sierra Club. Certainly, we have our website promotes it. There's a lot of opportunities to explain to people the benefits of being able to go green right now, and programs to help support it. So the great comment. I just 100% couldn't agree with you more. Quick question for Tamir here. I grew up in a community where diversity was, we had Methodists and Catholics. That was our idea of diversity. A little town in Indiana, and so we didn't, but still, I have to say that the Methodist Church I raised my kids in, I learned about the Millennium Development Goals, now the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. I learned about those in teaching Sunday school as part of the curriculum there, which was a great compliment, I think, to the Methodist Church. I didn't learn it in graduate school, didn't learn it in the place I worked, I learned it there. Within the Muslim faith, obviously we hear a lot of talk in the Christian faith, and I think rightfully scriptural, we should be good stewards of the environment. Can you explain some of the aspects of Islam that support being a good steward or supporter of the planet?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Cliff. So it's actually, just in preparation, for this event. I kind of just did some reading. There's so many, on this issue, the faiths there's so many commonalities, in the Quran and in the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, the idea that these are signs when we look around in nature. These are signs of God. So I know those are common themes, in the Christian, Jewish, and many other faiths. So as far as interfaith goes, there's just so much common ground when it comes to climate. And again, I mentioned about treading lightly on the earth. That's something that's really resonated. I just remember from my Sunday school classes that, we're really taught that we just, we shouldn't have a very heavy footprint, and it's funny that term carbon footprint is really, but even at a young age, it really resonated with me when I heard that term initially, because again, treading lightly is part of this. And then there's being stewards. There are verses in the Quran that talk about how we are protectors of nature around us. So, like I say, the themes were always in sync with what I was learning in school. I had science teachers, I remember, that go back to the 7th grade that taught us about the hole in the ozone layer and the switching of the refrigerants from the chlorofluorocarbons to the hydrofluorocarbons. And then in high school, we talked about, the whole greenhouse gases, global warming, and this is way back when. So, but it was always in line with what I was learning in Sunday school as well, because we just have this idea also about the trees, the insects, the birds, everything in nature is praying in their own way. We don't know how they pray, but again, that's part of our belief in what we're taught in the Muslim faith, is that this is all God's creation and we're part of that creation, and we're all, so to look out for one another. And that's it's really, like, I was just amazed at, I wasn't too surprised, but there's just so many, the overlap with all the faiths in this arena is really startling. So
thank you. We've talked a lot about institutional change. We've talked a little bit less about individual people's willingness to take personal accountability for climate justice and what drives them. I'm wondering, perhaps just you as people have talked about that a little bit, but where do you see places that actually move people to make choices that will move the needle for us on either, in any aspect, right? We've talked about advocacy and education, we've talked about changes of behavior, we've talked about practical solutions, but what works in terms of getting personal accountability? Because I think our faith traditions all ask us that question, right? And what I heard you say is, how are we responsible? And we're all kind of selfish these days, and so, I'm just curious what suggestions you have lived or witnessed in personal accountability. What works?
Okay, I'll go first. Well, there's lots of different things I could think about, but a lot of times it seems like it's family that really motivates people. And let me just tell a little story about, in 2010, I was working for the Sierra Club, and my kids were going to Morton Magnet Middle School, and I was living in Millard. So that's a long ways. So anyway, I'd pick up my kids at Morton Magnet Middle School after school, and my daughter was in the 8th grade, my son was in the 7th grade, I believe. They could correct me on this, but anyway, so I picked them up. Earlier that day, I'd had a conversation with somebody at the Sierra Club asking me if I wanted to work on fighting the Keystone Pipeline. And so I pick up the kids and they hop in the car. My daughter's sitting next to me. She's got her earbuds in. She's a typical 14-year-old or 13-year-old, whatever she was at that time. She's got her earbuds in. She's listening to whatever hip hop thing was cool at that time. And my son's sitting behind me. And so I start talking about the being hired to work on the Keystone Pipeline. And well, I'm talking away, and you know how it is sometimes when you talk to your kids, they're not paying any attention. But I figure I'll just keep talking. So, and I think maybe my son might be hearing me, even though he's behind me. So I'm talking and talking, and after a little bit, one earbud flops out. And then a little bit further down the road, the other earbud flops out. And I finished talking about all the threats to the aquifer and all the challenges that the Keystone Pipeline would provide. And Helen my daughter's name's Helen, she turns to me and she says, "Daddy, you have to stop them." And I said, "Sweetie, it's not entirely up to me, but we'll do what we can." But the thing about it is, she became motivated to get involved in the Keystone Pipeline fight, and she showed up at hearings, and Linda's nodding her head. She gave wonderful testimony at public hearings. But I guess what I'm saying is that sometimes it's the family connection, it's the personal connection that motivates people to get involved in something that makes a difference. And I guess along those lines, as I said, it wasn't up to me, but when everybody worked together, that's what creates the miracle that I was talking about, where you can do things that don't seem like they're possible. And that's the kind of effort we need in dealing with climate change.
First, I just wanted to compliment Ken. When my kids were younger, the surefire way to stop them acting up was for me to talk about work. You would hear this as heads hit the table, and then everything went to a nice, quiet, relaxing dinner. So compliments for Ken. Your kids were listening. My kids' heads were snapping back. So I really think that it's about a combination of values in wanting to protect the planet, around being a good neighbor. It's also about being a responsible person yourself. And I also think it's about listening. I don't think we do enough listening. And I think we're listening less and less. This is Cliff Fleener's commentary. But I think we need to listen to each other. And just because someone disagrees with you doesn't mean they may not have a valid point. And I've learned so much from listening to people. And you have to be willing to change your mind. And I think it's importance on getting good information, good data, and if someone doubts it, have the patience to work with them and help to explain it in a loving and respectful manner. And I think that's really important. We can't solve our problems if we're calling each other names, right? So that's my 2 cents. It's just an old-fashioned courtesy, good values, learn to look at some data and be patient with your neighbors and your friends and the people that you may not like. It's really important.
Great comment, Cliff. If I could just throw in one other thing, I often say the first thing about organizing is listening to what other people have to say, because if you don't know what they care about, you're not going to get anywhere with them. Did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I think, along the same lines, I know you'd mentioned about the importance of the messenger. And I think about, our community at the mosque, and, we are in Ramadan, and we get together, on the weekends to break our fast together at night. So I heard about mosques in different areas around the country. There's a movement to get away from using paper plates, plastic bottles, plastic forks, paper towels, using linens instead, and to reduce the amount of trash, because when we get together, you can imagine, and not just that, we're also, a person's been fasting all day, so you kind of eat with your eyes. So just a reminder, that, whatever you put on your plate, let's try to finish it, and so to reduce or eliminate the amount of food that actually ends up in the garbage. So these are all challenges, and, I got to thinking, well, we hear about these stories and this movement. Well, what about getting some of those people, maybe from the other mosques, to come talk to us about their experiences in Ramadan and how they, because obviously there's going to be some work involved now. We got to wash the plates, we got to wash the forks, somebody's got to clean the paper towel, or not, they're not paper anymore, the fabric. So there's some washing now. Obviously all the conveniences that go with. But then, to explain to us how much trash you guys have at the end of this communal, when we all get together to eat, wouldn't it be nice just to see the trash can empty? And you can almost literally reduce our trash so much. So I think there's some. I won't want to say low hanging fruit, because I think it's again, we're changing minds, and but I do wish, I kind of feel like if there was more communication even amongst the Muslim community around the country in this movement, because I know there's groups like Green Muslims that are doing some really good things out in Washington, D.C., and so hopefully that word will get around, and because the uniqueness of Ramadan and the things that we run into with our events, and a Muslim coming to talk to us about that would know, about the challenges that we face and how we could learn from them. So that's.
Thank you. I haven't really shared much about a Jewish perspective on any of these things, and I was sitting here thinking, how does my Judaism inform this conversation? And I think when you spoke about deep listening, it reminded me to just share a few of these ideas, and that is that the idea of debate in Judaism is core to our study, and to challenge each other, the text, our understanding by turning it over and over, to look at it from multiple perspectives, and to invite diversity of thought. So that, like the rabbis, and by rabbis I mean like the history of all rabbis, not just like my rabbi, but the rabbis are love to fight, right? Like not in the way of like picking up weapons fight, but to banter, right? To push and encourage each other to imagine how else they might look at Scripture. And in my job at Trifaith, I often say that our commonalities connect us, but our differences help us to grow. And I think about when we're looking at complex conversations like understanding another person's faith, or validating another person's faith, or talking about climate change, Judaism has a lot to teach the world about holding more than one truth at the same time. I feel like we're living in a place in history where that's not allowed. And we curate our news feed to hear what is common to what we've already decided is truth. And we take in these snap bits of 140 characters of words. And that one way that we can really change the world is by engaging not only in listening, but deep listening, and to encourage space for disagreeing with respect, right? And that it's okay for us to say, in this moment of history, that like our communities are looking at the world through different historical lenses, through different geopolitical issues, through different pain and tension. And can we see the humanity in each other in the conversation, right? And so I really think that's core to being Jewish for me, and I believe for most Jewish people. And I think that we'll make more progress with the deniers by hearing, responding to them by saying, instead of, why do you believe that? You're wrong in believing that. I've had a lot of success having a conversation where I say, can you help me understand how you came to that? And then you often come to those conversations about values, and my dad said, and the my scripture taught me. And sometimes there's places for us to grow in our understanding between opinions, right? And to hold space for multiple perspectives. And I find sometimes, in particular, and I'm not saying anything negative about Christianity, but Christianity has the capital T truth thing of salvation. And so sometimes that tests our ability to make space for people who have an alternative path to something bigger. For me, that something bigger is when we come together to have these really complex conversations and see each other as human. So thank you. I'm wondering how those questions are coming. Do you?
I was wondering if I could.
Oh, they're coming my way, so go ahead.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate that, and although I'm not very good at dealing with having people disagree with me, I mean, or having other opinions, but I had an experience with that last year. Nebraska Interfaith Fire and Light set out on a project where we're going to, and it's actually still ongoing, but we're working with Native people in Nebraska and learning about the Native ways of taking care of the earth. And one of the interesting things that Native people like to talk about is that instead of talking about things like resources, they talk about relatives, so that you're not thinking of something to be extracted or utilized for your own good, but rather how does that relate to you, and also the idea that you both honor your ancestors, and you have to look many generations down the road whenever you make a decision. But one of the things that we did when we put together this project, we hired a Native consultant, and I had a very clear vision of what I wanted to do, and this was the program we were going to have. And the Native consultant came in and said, no, that won't work. And that was really hard for me to hear. But eventually it was like, maybe I can learn something by just sitting back and letting the Native people run this event. And so we ended up having an event where it was an indigenous harvest celebration. It was right after Thanksgiving, and we had a Native chef, we had Native foods, we had Native people came, and they ran the event. There was Native prayers, Native messages about how they care for the earth. But it was, well, like I said, it was hard for me to suddenly let go of being in charge. But to me it was an important lesson, because I feel like I learned a lot, and we're continuing to work on that. We hope to have another event maybe later this spring, dealing with kind of planting and spring activities. But I think there's definitely truth in learning from other people and setting aside your own beliefs and saying, oh, maybe there's another way of looking at the world.
All right, we've got a whole nother evening worth of questions here and now. Thank you. I'll just start at the top. Anyone who's interested in answering this can jump in. What are some constructive ways to reach across the aisle to politicians and community leaders who are faith-based but do not necessarily prioritize climate change initiatives? This is one of those miracles that we're looking for.
I am not a lobbyist, wouldn't want to be a lobbyist, but I think the best way is data, explain how this affects their constituencies, and try to drive home the importance to the communities that they serve, and somehow connect them to the problem and to their constituencies. And I think the longer term solution, if that doesn't resonate, start working with those constituencies and find something that does resonate. Because that's the key to this is grassroots. And the solution to it, I think, I've talked about this at work and every place I've worked in any program, really need to have a grassroots program. Whether it's people on the line, working in all of plants, including our coal plants or the manufacturing plant, or at the community level, is getting those areas organized to get the message. But data and communication and drawing it down to that district or constituency. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the more you can get people involved, I guess personally, I've found sometimes it works, and sometimes you can't get through to people at all, and sometimes I'm the wrong messenger. But the more that you can build common relationships and build common ground with people, I guess I always like events that involve food, because that's something everybody likes to eat, and so food and music. If you can have some good music and some good food, that's a good way of bringing people together.
Yeah, I'll agree with the food and music. I'm there.
Okay, let's have a party.
Right. This next question is interesting. It seems like the Genesis command of be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, in all of that's in quotes, has been the de facto command of many who argue against climate science. Do you know how to get past that? Is this capitalism, or I'm curious.
What a loaded question here. Let me just start by saying that I've had the privilege of being able to work internationally for quite some time, and I spent quite a bit of time in India, where I've probably seen the largest amount of poverty, but I've also seen the largest amount of entrepreneurial behavior. I was there when the small rupees were removed, everyone had to have credit cards, and you'd be driving through, and there's literally people just traveling into the big cities all the time. I was in a medium-sized city with only 4 million people in it. And you had people selling things all over the place, and they would have like just a shorts on, no tops, no shoes, that they'd be selling whatever they're selling, but have their cell phones out and start having transactions. And I think the truth is, when you start talking to people other strata of that society, or other stratas of our society, the more wealthy people are, and I'm not against having children, but the less likely they are to have children. So the solution is, I think, to help sensible economic development raises the boats. People we don't have to use coercion, you don't have to use force. It's just a fact. The more prosperous people are, the fewer children that they tend to have. So I think it's an economic argument. I'm not a population control person per se, but I think that's one mechanism, is the economic development to help mitigate the overpopulation issue that may be in certain locations.
There's a book called Drawdown, and one of the recommendations they made in this regard was educate women. That the more women are elevated, the less likely you are to have overpopulation, and the economic benefits that accrue with that as well.
Well, the way I would look at it is just from a technology standpoint. The way I like to think of it is, maybe technology can advance and and maybe address a lot of the shortages that we have. So that's where a lot of my hope lies, is just in the work that's being done in universities, the work that's being done with various companies around the world to really just manage the Earth's resources in a more efficient way, and hopefully, it would alleviate a lot of the problems that we have here with distribution of resources. So.
There are a number of very pointed questions for you, Cliff. So here we go. No. What are OPPD's plans to accelerate its renewable energy deployment in order to meet its commitment, especially given the uncertainty around the K-Junction project?
Well, first of all, we are already working to increase the amount of. K-Junction is it's a solar development out in New York. We've got teams of people out there right now meeting with county commissioners. If it comes to fruition, it'll be about 1,000 acres, 310 megawatts, I believe. A sizable amount of clean energy. We're working to develop that. We've got a number of other projects I can't talk about, but we're working to accelerate that to try to get as much clean energy as possible. And we had our near-term generation program approved by the board last year, and as I mentioned, 90% of that will be clean energy. We are working absolutely as quickly as we can to be able to bring renewable energy to bear for our community. But as we all know, we've discussed, You just don't go somewhere, buy some land, and put up a solar field. It's a long process that requires a lot of community involvement, a lot of regulatory requirement, and to ensure that we can achieve it. So I can say we are working fruitfully to bring in as much renewable as possible.
We'll just stay right with you here. Get another one here. How can OPPD achieve its sustainability and environmental goals while taking in new commercial users of electricity, including data centers?
Well, we're working aggressively to add additional capacity, additional generation to support.
So I'm just going to say first that perhaps you are not aware of this, but Google has 23 data centers globally. 3 of them, and I believe a 4th one opening in the region of Omaha, Council Bluffs, Lincoln, is an enormous commitment on behalf of Google to invest in data centers in Nebraska and Iowa, but it has a huge implication for you. And maybe you could even say about during some of the coldest and hottest days, how you've partnered with some of the community projects to address this increase.
Absolutely, and I have to say that during our recent winter crisis, we got a lot of support and assistance from the data centers, including them activating their own on-site generation to help us keep the lights on. It was for us in OPPD, it was really for us a bit of a crisis. We were really worried in the early days that we were going to have to start shutting off power. And they were able to come forward and help us and support us in that capability. Plus, they worked, I believe it's, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not a spokesman for these data centers, so I'm not speaking on their behalf, but they have worked closely with the Biden administration on the 24/7 power plan. And they do a lot of development of additional clean energy projects across the SPP, which is the Southwest Power Pole, which, again, here I'm going to go into acronym city. I should have mentioned acronyms was the one thing that I didn't agree with the team on, because it seems like we've got an acronym for everything. But that's our regional transmission organization. We're sort of in that electrical infrastructure. All of the electricity that we make is sold into that, and then we buy our electricity back. And the reason that's done is to give you some flexibility so that we can provide power consistently across the whole region from Canada to the northern part of Texas. So they've been good partners. They have and made claims to net zero and have done an excellent job, I think, of developing clean energy to help offset their direct impact. The importance that we have to do is define the energy and the ability to support them effectively. And a good percentage of that's coming from renewable.
Why did they come here?
They came here because OPPD is in the top 5 for the lowest cost electricity and most reliable electricity. And I have to say that we're a public power entity. We're not selling stock. And so we're not on the market. This is a classic example of where, a collective, I don't use the wrong term here, but a community-based form of capitalism can certainly work to deliver good benefits to the community and the area. So I'm pretty proud of that, because a lot of folks that maybe aren't a fan of public power would say, well, the free market by itself, uncaged, will do a better job. Well, the facts, the data is number 1 in reliability, and I think we're in the top 2 or 3 for cost.
Thank you.
And so that's why they're here.
Okay, we're going to give you a little break.
Thank you.
Kenneth, I think you're best suited to answer this next one, but anybody can chime in. Please address the meaning of stewardship in the context of personal and community proactive participation.
Well, there's lots of different ways of thinking about stewardship, but when there's personal stewardship in terms of the way that things that you do in your own life, like, ways that you can reduce your own carbon footprint, the kind of garden that you have, the kind of car that you drive, what temperature you put your thermostat, all those kinds of things can have an impact on the environment. And what was the other part of it? Just stewardship.
Sorry, I opened the whole new set of questions. So the question was, I'm so sorry, in the context of personal and communal proactive participation.
Okay, yeah. But I think also it, as I said before, there's a certain amount you can do with at your own home, but if there's public policy changes can make a much bigger impact. So something like eliminating fossil fuel infrastructure or retiring a coal plant or something like that has a much larger impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. For example, there was just recently, the state has put together a climate plan where they're going to be submitting grant applications. I'd invite you to go look at it. It's on the NDE, Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy webpage, and they talk about a variety of things that they're thinking about applying for grant funds to support. And one of them is utility energy efficiency programs, seeking additional funding for those kinds of programs. So advocacy, engagement, that's a big part of, I think that's a big part of stewardship.
I think this is a follow-up question to that. How does the trend of declining membership in organized religion impact the intersection of faith and climate change?
Well, it probably impacts, well, according to the pastors that I've talked to, I think one of the things that it's impacted is that pastors are becoming more cautious about talking about controversial topics. Like there's a woman that I know who's a pastor at a small church southwest of Lincoln, and she doesn't bring up topics like climate change because she's concerned about alienating any of her small flock, and that some of them may leave if it causes any of them to be alienated. So she tries to stick to things that she thinks are safe. So it makes it harder in some ways to do outreach as faith communities decline. However, one of the things that the Nebraska IPL tries to do is we also say that even if you're not part of an organized faith community, that's fine. If you have any moral belief that what we're doing is that we need to take care of the earth, then we support that as well. So you don't have to be a member of a faith community to take action, just so long as you have any kind of a belief, but we think that there's a moral imperative to address climate change.
Thank you. I would address this a little bit as well. The shift in the religious landscape is kind of the words that I use to describe that. In the most recent survey, the highest identifying group in the United States is 28% what we call nons and nuns, not N-U-N, N-O-N-E. And that is largely 18 to 39-year-olds who are interested seekers, right? Often looking for a community of meaning, just not their grandma's version. And I think that we will increasingly see that age demographic cares deeply about many broken systems and is looking for ways to find community of meaning, and opportunities such as the issue of climate justice really resonates for many people in that age category. And that's actually, I would say to the clergy friends of yours, they're missing an opportunity to actually bring in another generation of followers by selling them short and not having that intellectual conversation with them. And I think, at Tri-Faith, we really try to model that opportunity for people to engage regardless of their relationship to religion, right? Really realizing that for some people, organized religion is core to their identity, but for other people, it's their trauma story. And that we need to be honest that there are people who have had negative experiences with faith tradition as well, but they still might be seeking, especially in this time, there's a lot of neuroscience that's been done, research about having spirituality practice actually decreases isolation, depression, and thoughts of suicide. And so this idea that we have human connection to each other and to something greater than us is sorely missing in our world. And so reimagining what these spiritual experiences have is something that I hope we add to the collective good with. Cliff, got another question for you. Has the energy requirements of the data centers and the South Power Pool slowed the closure of the coal plants in Nebraska?
Simply put, no. It's a reliability margin we have to hit. That's the key part. We have the ability to purchase. Like I said, we sell 100% of our power. We sell and we buy back 100% of our power. The issue is the margin of cushion we have to have. We have to be able to generate enough power, not just to keep the lights on here completely and contribute to the power pool, but a 15% margin above that. So the data centers are not in any way connected to our delay in decommissioning North Omaha, which is on target for 2016.
I think this question relates to that question, and I'm curious if others might want to answer this also, because this is not on you and OPPD alone. This is a very big question I'm about to put in front of you.
Okay.
Do you think environmental racism exists? And if so, what can be done about it?
Let me tell you a story about my family. My mother grew up in Chicago, just north of where the stockyards are. There's a bubbly creek. If you read Upton St. Clair, Bubbly Creek, it looked like a disaster. My mother was named after her great aunt who died at 12 from cholera. Her grandfather died from cholera as well. They lived less than a mile from Bubbly Creek. In basically a working class neighborhoods, McKinley Park in Chicago. I definitely think those plants were sited there many years ago, and they have a direct and negative impact on the people that were living there. It's dramatically cleaner now. New generations of folks have moved into some of these neighborhoods, and there's still some work to be done to keep them clean. So are there impacted communities of color? Yes. Simply put. And the solution to that, though, is to work on getting them cleaned up effectively, because that pollution wasn't put there necessarily by my mother's people. They paid a pretty high price when they were there as well. But it's still a problem that has to be solved.
Well, I guess I would say definitely yes. I mean, there's lots of evidence to support that. I mean, well, we know that Northeast Omaha is the that traditionally, historically, was the place where most African Americans lived. They were redlined into that area, and there's a whole host of environmental problems in that area. There's higher incidence of asthma in that area. There's lead in the soil from the Basarco plant. There's lots of issues that are in that area. And I guess also, I mean, as I said, I've done some work with native people, and spent the last year and a half working on a project where we're trying to defend a native sweat lodge that was being threatened by development. And unfortunately, we weren't able to stop the development, but it's one of those things where I think if a Christian church had come in and said, we don't want to see this development happen here, there would have been concessions made. When the Native people said, we have sweat lodges here and they're very important to our people, and they're core to our ceremonies and our beliefs, they were ignored. And so it's still happening today. In 2024, we're still, environmental racism is real, it's still happening, and we need to do better.
I'm going to give you a different question. This will be our final question, and I'd like all of you to answer to this one. I'm going to try to turn us to a little bit warmer topic. So in our increasingly polarized political climate, can religion and faith be a unifier in the pursuit of better environmental justice? And from your faith tradition, how would you answer that question?
Like I say, as far as the commonalities between the faiths, as I mentioned before, it's just, this is one thing where I think it can bring people together of different faiths, that we all are sharing same resources. We're sharing the earth, the food supplies, the water supplies. We all have the same concerns. We all want clean water. So regardless of our political affiliations, the polarization, it does seem like there is a lot of common ground, whether a person's Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, or people, again, that may not be affiliated with a particular faith. I think this is an area of commonality that we as human beings can all come together. And it's, we bring up the example of the community garden. It's just something that brings people together, they get to know each other and communicate and build relationships, which makes communication that much easier. So I just feel like more along those lines, it's actually an opportunity. This climate change discussion can be an opportunity, in my view, that we can find common ground and work together.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I was just thinking about the story, the Keystone Pipeline story. I remember there was a hearing in Grand Island, Nebraska, and the order of people who spoke, there was a person who was of the Jewish faith, there was a Muslim, there were several Native American leaders, there was a Catholic priest, there were several Protestant pastors, but they all had the common ground of saying we need to take care of the earth. We need to, and as Tamir said, what part of clean air, what part of clean water, what part of caring for our children don't we all want? We all want those kinds of things. So yeah, and I also think, as Tamir was saying, that's also part of all of our faith traditions. They all talk about those kinds of things of caring for, caring for those in need and caring for caring for our brothers and sisters. That's part of it, and caring for the earth is part of that as well.
I just wanted to add as well that as part of standing my organization, we're going to be hiring an environmental justice specialist later this year, which we're building out. I think it's something unique within the utility industry, because there are literally environmental justice requirements written in all federal laws. I think it's important that we put focus to ensure that we're dealing with those appropriately at OPPD. So we're going to be hiring that position later this year.
It would be a missed opportunity if I didn't tell you that I would love you to come back to the Tri-Faith Commons. If you were interested in volunteering in the Unity Garden and Hope Orchard, I'm sure that we have a place for you to get involved, and please just let me know that you're interested. I'll connect you. Or actually, Marcia, can you raise your hand in the back there? She is our volunteer coordinator, so she's here tonight, and I'm sure that she would be glad to let you know. They've started the seeds. We're ready to go. We just need the temperature to warm up, but not too fast, right, Mike? And I'm so grateful that you've been here. Thank you to the Nebraska Journalism Trust for trusting us to be a partner tonight. And thank you to all of you for your vulnerability and for your expertise in this panel.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you again to everybody who came tonight, to our signers, Dana and Stephanie, to our partners, the Tri-Faith Initiative and Humanities Nebraska, and our panelists, Tamir, Ken, and Cliff. We really appreciate your insights. This is a great discussion, including the reminder to respectfully question and deeply listen to one another. That really resonated with us as journalists in the room, I think. Our faiths and our interest in climate justice remind us that we're all connected and we're all in this together. So I hope you come away from tonight with some new knowledge, a new friend from your tables, or a new idea for how you can work together to make a difference. I invite you to visit our NebraskaJournalismTrust.org and our FlatwaterFreePress.org. Subscribe to our newsletter. Please check out our coverage. We have deep coverage of water security, land ownership, and and the community response to alternative power supplies, and we'll continue to cover those issues. Our coverage comes from you. It comes from our readers. It comes from tips that we receive. It comes from when you call us up and say, hey, what about this? So please continue to share your ideas with us. We want to provide news coverage that matters to you. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.